Namaste, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are talking about forgiveness, but we're specifically talking about a certain type of forgiveness, which is self-forgiveness. And there are actually two different types of self-forgiveness. There's the kind where we need to forgive ourselves because we regret something. We regret staying too long in a situation or tolerating too much or not knowing something that we now know and we wish we would have known it sooner. That is a specific type of self-forgiveness. Then there's this type of self-forgiveness we're going to talk about today, which is when you know that you did or said something that wasn't right. And as a result, someone or something got hurt. And when that happens, we can carry around not just guilt, but shame. It's something I don't think is talked about enough. How do we forgive ourselves when we know we've done something wrong, when we know we've hurt someone? And what is the process that we can move through that and not only release all of the negative emotions that come along with that, but actually learn from it and maybe find some goodness in it. So that is what we're going to talk about today. Before we get into that, I want to invite you to join my Substack newsletter. It comes out once a week. Reflections on midlife, on yoga philosophy, on really just living with more ease and more peace in this modern day world using the ancient wisdom of yoga. And along with that, I send out a weekly practice. So you get both. You get the wisdom piece, the piece that will help you with self-discovery and reflection and awareness. And then you get the embodiment practice that helps bring it all together. So I invite you to head over to my show notes. There's a link there to sign up. And I hope to see you in my community. All right, now on to the show. Okay, friends. So today we are talking about self-forgiveness. And as I mentioned, we're talking about the type of self-forgiveness that we need to move through when we know that we have done something that is out of alignment with who we are or that feels out of integrity. And this can be hard because it really requires us to put our egos aside. And as we all know, being humans walking around on this planet, that our egos are very strong. So I'm going to walk you through the different steps of this process because there really are specific steps that you need to move through. And I'm going to walk you through them in a particular order, but they don't always need to be done exactly in this order. Sometimes we need to mix things up depending on our process and how we need things to move. So this is when we've done something or said something that we wish we hadn't, when we've made a choice that we regret, when we know we've acted not out of love and compassion, but out of fear or hurt or ego, or just having a really unconscious moment where maybe even in the moment you didn't realize that you were hurting someone else or hurting a situation, but you then become aware later on and you look back and realize, oh, I did do this thing, even though I didn't do it intentionally. A great example, modern day example, is how we use our phones and how often we can be hurtful to someone else if we are using our phones unconsciously, because that is telling the other person that they don't matter, that they're not enough for you to put down your phone, that whatever's on the phone is more important than them. And we do this sometimes unconsciously. But if we become aware of it, it's something that we can feel guilty about and we can regret and wish we hadn't done. So that's an example of an unconscious moment. So what happens when we do this thing, we say this thing, and we realize, oh, shoot, I have hurt someone else or I've hurt a situation, and we have to now sit with that. I think this is one of the hardest places to be because the mind gets really brutal and it starts replaying everything, right? We start replaying the situation over and over in our minds and thinking about how we could have done things differently. We have this deep desire that we know will not be fulfilled to be able to go back and redo, to be able to rewind time. and do the situation differently. And we tend to keep circling the moment as if punishing ourselves was going to fix it. And of course, we can't do any of those things, right? We can't rewind time. Continually repeating the moment over and over and making ourselves feel badly isn't going to fix it. Replaying it in our minds isn't going to fix it. And so, what do we do with that? What do we do with all the super uncomfortable feelings that we get from that? And when I say feelings, I mean uncomfortable emotions, uncomfortable body sensations, uncomfortable thought patterns. What do we do with that? And how can we take this situation that is less than desirable and turn it into something that we can learn and grow from? So, from a yoga perspective, self forgiveness is really about being brutally honest. And so it's not about pretending something didn't happen. It's not rushing to make excuses or bypassing through the discomfort. It is about telling the truth and feeling into what is in this moment, right? All the uncomfortable sensations in the body, all the uncomfortable emotions and thoughts in the mind, really allowing yourself to feel into that, and then making any repairs that need to be made. And then the last part is the letting go, the letting go. And that letting go piece is really, really important, because if we don't, we will carry around all of these toxic feelings and emotions, and they will make us sick, right? They will poison us. And so there is there's no good that comes from continually holding on to the negativity that is associated with feeling badly when you do something wrong. So let's talk about the difference real quick between guilt and shame, because I think it applies to this topic we're talking about. When you feel guilty about something, guilt is an emotion that says, I did something wrong. And it's a useful emotion. It's an unpleasant emotion, but it's useful because it tells us when we are out of alignment, when we have not lived up to our own values and our own standards of behaving, of thinking, of acting. And that awareness, that emotion that gives us that awareness, allows us to change. Shame is something different. Shame is an emotion that says, not I did something wrong, but I am wrong. Like innately, my existence, my essence, my core is wrong. There's something wrong with me. And that is not a useful emotion, because when we sink into shame, we tend to shut down and we can't see our way through it, because we don't believe that we are good. We don't believe that we are worthy. And when we have those core beliefs of not being good and worthy, then we don't see our way through repair and growth and learning opportunities. We're just kind of sitting in this toxic soup of I am not good, or I am not enough, or I am bad. And so we want to really be careful when a situation like this occurs and we know that we've done something that is out of alignment for us, when we are feeling guilty or potentially shameful because we did something wrong, maybe we can take a moment and just tap in and try to understand the emotion. Try to peel apart those two very closely related emotions of guilt and shame and understand, am I feeling guilty because I know I did something wrong and that's making me feel badly? Or am I feeling shameful as if I am wrong? And if the answer is shame, then that's the moment to try to reorient yourself towards your truth, right? Towards the fact that you are at your essence and at your core a being of love, a being of peace, a being of compassion, right? And that everything else that exists on top of that essential truth. And coming back to that essential truth may be your first step. It may not. You may have to work through some of these other steps before you can come back to that essential truth. But just being aware that there's a difference between guilt and shame and what one emotion tells you versus what the other emotion tells you, it can be very useful in this process. Okay, so you've done something wrong. You have exploded your partner or your kids. You have said something mean to your coworker or lost your patience or unconsciously took out your phone at lunch with your friend and ignored her for 10 minutes or whatever the case may be, that you feel that you have done something that is out of alignment with who you are and your values. The very first step is becoming truthful about that fact. Before we can get to self-forgiveness, there has to be truth. We have to be honest with ourselves about what we did and what impact it had on the other, and what part of us was behind this behavior. And maybe it's even a thought, right? We can even feel like we need to forgive ourselves because we have certain thoughts that we feel we shouldn't have, right? We wish we didn't have, that we feel guilty or shameful about thoughts that we have, right? So this doesn't even have to be an action. It could actually just be a thought. And the first thing we need to do is be truthful. We performed the action, we had the thought, and what impact did that have, and what part of me was behind that. And truth is not cruelty, right? We're not asking these questions and asking ourselves to be brutally honest so that we can criticize ourselves. We're doing it so we can get clarity, right? What exactly happened? What did I do? What impact did I have? Right? These are important questions moving forward. Because what we want is understanding of ourselves. That's what we begin to get when we start asking the questions and being really truthful with the answers. And this can be extremely hard because it does require us to face our shadow side. We all have a light side and we all have a shadow side. And when we need to forgive ourselves, it requires us to face our shadow side and be very honest that we have one. Everyone has a shadow side. And the gift is being able to learn from your shadow side, is being self-aware enough to know that it exists, to be able to see it, and to be able to grow from it. Which takes us to our next piece. When we start asking the questions, what did I do? What happened? What was the impact I had? We go into what is called Svadhyaya in Sanskrit, which is self-study. And self-study is about self-inquiry, reflection, and studying our patterns. And instead of asking, what is wrong with me? We ask, what is going on with me? What's underneath the choice? That is self-study. And we start asking questions like, was I hurt, when I did that thing? Was I afraid? Was I exhausted? Was I triggered in some way? Was I trying to protect myself? Was I trying to control something? Was I acting from an old wound, possibly from childhood? Was I acting from ego? Was I acting unconsciously, right? We want to know the answers to these questions. They give us so much clarity on why we behaved the way that we behaved. And we're going to talk in a moment about repair, but this is part of the repair, because when we can understand what motivated our behavior, why we said, did, or thought that thing that we feel is out of alignment for us, we bring awareness to it, and hopefully we can change the pattern and not repeat it again and again and again, which is where a lot of shame comes from. It's not necessarily that I did this thing one time, it's that I keep repeating this thing. And therefore I must be bad because I keep doing the same thing over and over. When really you're doing the same thing over and over because you haven't become self-aware enough to recognize and understand the patterns or the programs that you're running and why you're running them. And when you have that awareness, that's when you can start changing the patterns and changing the programming. This is a big one for people who have a really short fuse and they tend to like easily blow up. And they can feel so badly about themselves, right? Because they don't want to get angry. They don't want to make somebody else feel bad. They don't want to lash out and make others, feel terrible. But it just seems like it happens so quick. It just happens before they can even stop it. And that is lack of self-awareness. That is not understanding your triggers, your patterns, your beliefs, right? It's not understanding what's underneath the behavior. So that is what self-study is about. How do I understand what is behind this behavior so that I can start to recognize it before I become reactive, so that I can respond instead of react? And that makes all the difference. Um, and I think it's such an important distinction because sometimes when we have these patterns that we repeat over and over again, and we start saying to ourselves, like, you're just a bad person, you're just mean, you're just horrible, whatever it is that we're telling ourselves, we start to think that if we are just continually berating ourselves, that somehow is making us accountable. But it's not. That is not accountability. That is really, it does not serving the situation, it's not serving the person, and it is not serving you. It really just becomes a form of harm. And there's a concept in yoga called ahisma, which is non-harming. And this non-harming applies to all living beings, including yourself. So when you are being harmful to yourself, you are you are not applying this concept of ahisma, and you are not acting in alignment with the essence of who you are. It's another way of being out of alignment, even though our ego mind wants to convince us that maybe if I'm just hard enough on myself, this behavior will change, right? Maybe if I'm just hard enough on myself, I won't do that anymore. And if I'm hard enough on myself, it kind of makes up for what I did to that other person. That's what our mind wants to tell us. But the truth is, we are just we are just diving further into non-alignment, right? We're moving further out of integrity, and it's just pain on top of pain. So no, self-forgiveness is not letting ourselves off the hook, but it is saying, I don't need to keep hurting myself in order to prove that I understand that what I did mattered, right? What I did mattered. And repeatedly berating ourselves and harming ourselves is not a path to healing. And that's what we really want here, right? We want a path to healing, healing for ourselves and healing for anyone who was involved in whatever the situation is. So how do we do that, right? How do we do that? Well, we recognize when we're out of alignment, as I mentioned. We decide to be truthful about what we did and how it impacted another person or being. We self-study, we get behind the patterns of behavior of why did I do this? Then we decide to not live there, right? We decide that we're not going to continue down the path of being out of alignment, and we move to repair. So at some point, we have to ask the next question, which is, what is mine to do now? Is it an apology that needs to happen? Is it a conversation that needs to be had? Is it a truth that you need to say out loud, right? Because this first part, when I say be truthful, first we have to be truthful with ourselves. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you don't need to relay those truths to other people, but sometimes you do. Sometimes you need to be really truthful with the person that was impacted by what you did. And a pattern I need to stop repeating, right? So this is, coming back to that, what pattern do I not need to stop repeating? Because that's part of the repair. The There used to be an old phrase, and I'm blanking exactly on how it goes, but I think it's actions speak louder than words. I think that's the phrase from when I was younger. And basically, what that means is you can say you're sorry until you're blue in the face, but if you keep repeating the same actions, then the person doesn't really feel the repair, right? So we want to repair in the moment, and we want to try to repair for the future, recognizing that patterns don't change overnight. This may take time, it may take more work, but at least we start to develop that sense of awareness with the intention of preventing the pattern in the future. So, um, even if we can't, let me say this. I wanted to move on to another piece, but let me say this first. Sometimes we're not going to be able to fully repair something, right? It's just not possible. And we have to be able to accept that and hold that with compassion and know that becoming more honest matters, becoming more aware matters, becoming more humble matters. And if you are in a place right now where this applies to you, that you need to forgive yourself and you can't fully repair the situation by saying or doing something, then be gentle with yourself. Take responsibility and know that you are still worthy of compassion, that you can be wrong and still be human, that you can make a repair and still come back to yourself. You don't have to spend the rest of your life becoming the worst thing you ever did. I want that to be so very clear because sometimes these transgressions we need to forgive ourselves for are small and sometimes they're big. Sometimes they're really big. And each thing I'm saying to you today applies to the smallest transgression to the largest. And as I mentioned, sometimes an apology can fix it, an apology and a hug, and we're moving on. And sometimes that is just not the case. Sometimes the person that you want to repair with isn't even here anymore. And so repair is not possible because they are not with us anymore. And that is when you need to come back to I'm being honest, I'm being aware, I'm being humble. I am attempting to change these patterns that need to be changed. And I need to have compassion for myself. I am not the worst thing that I ever did. The last part I want to speak to is moving these emotions through your body. And this can be done in any part of the process and maybe in multiple parts of the process. But what happens when we're carrying guilt, regret, shame is that those emotions get stored in our body. I just heard the best quote today on a Tara Brach podcast. I don't know if she is the one who came up with this quote or not, but the quote was, your issues are in your tissues. And it's so short and succinct and so powerfully true. Whatever negative emotions that we have, we carry them in our tissues and our body holds them. And we know this because we feel it, right? When you are feeling guilty, regretful, shameful, you might feel, tension, tightness, or heaviness in your chest. You could feel constriction in your throat. Maybe your belly is upset. Maybe you're locking your jaw. Maybe you just feel so restless. You can't be peaceful. You can't sit still. Maybe your body feels really heavy or tired because you're literally carrying the weight of these emotions. Sometimes it feels like the whole body is collapsing and bracing, where the shoulders are coming forward and the chest is caved in. And it's as if you're expecting some sort of retaliation, and so you're bracing and protecting your body against it. self-forgiveness is not just a mental process. Yes, we need to become aware of our patterns and behaviors, and we need to make our repairs, and we need to distinguish between I did a bad thing and I am bad. But it's also about moving all of that through your body, processing it, allowing the discomfort to be there, feeling into it, holding it with compassion, and then allowing it to move out. Because if not, it gets stuck. And the other thing that can happen, so it can get stuck if you can't learn to move it through and forgive yourself, but it can also get stuck if you don't do those other pieces, if you don't get truthful, if you don't try to make repair, right? Then we're kind of bypassing, right? We're trying to pretend like this thing didn't happen. We're shoving it down. And in that process, the emotions that are in your body, the energy that's in your body, it starts to get stored. It starts to crystallize or cement inside of your body. And we do not want those emotions to harden inside of you because they will make you sick. And there's another quote, again, I don't know where it comes from, but it's something like not forgiving someone is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And that means like if, we continually hold on to anger and resentment towards someone else, that is like poisoning ourselves. But if we continually hang on to anger and resentment and guilt and shame towards ourselves, we are also drinking the poison. And so it's so important to be able to release, to be able to physically release the emotions, the energy of those emotions so that they don't get stuck and we're not poisoning ourselves. And that can be done in lots of different ways. I mean, sometimes it's breath pattern, sometimes it's crying, sometimes we just need to let that emotion out. Physiologically, from a biological standpoint, crying actually releases tons of stress hormones. So it's a beautiful way to release some of these pent up emotions. Sometimes it's going for a walk and being in nature or journaling, right? Journaling really helps us dive underneath those surface emotions and get to the deeper ones. When you're really trying to understand not just why you did what you did, but all of the emotions that you're feeling, because emotions are layered and complex. And most of the time, we're feeling many emotions in a single moment. We're feeling many emotions. So journaling helps us to get beneath that prominent emotion that seems to be sitting at the top, that's actually usually the less important one, and get to the deeper emotions that exist underneath. Sometimes it's about getting on the mat. Of course, I'm gonna, tout yoga here. Yoga is a beautiful way to move that energy through the body. It's the movement, it's the breath, it's the internal reflection. It's different openers in the body, hip openers, heart openers, these places that we store these unprocessed emotions. Sometimes it can be literally sitting with yourself and holding yourself. Maybe you place a hand over your heart. Maybe you hug yourself, and just allow the emotions to come, allow them to be there because emotions need to be acknowledged. If we say, okay, I'm going to be truthful and I'm going to take action to repair, and I'm going to try to prevent this from happening in the future, but I am not going to let myself feel the emotions that I feel, then they are just going to keep coming back, right? This is an essential piece of moving through and truly forgiving yourself is to feel what you need to feel, to acknowledge all of the emotions that are present, to sit with them and to sit with them with compassion and allow the discomfort to move so it becomes wisdom instead of something that you store in your body. That's what happens when the emotion is allowed to be there, when it's acknowledged, when it's felt fully, and it feels witnessed and it moves through you, it becomes wisdom instead of disease. So maybe this is the practice, right? This is the practice I'm offering you. Tell the truth. Feel what's real. Make the repair. Learn the lesson and let the body move what it's carrying through it and out. And don't turn one painful moment into your whole identity, especially if it's a bigger painful moment. I'm speaking to, not just that time that maybe you had a harsh word with your child or your spouse or a friend. Sometimes there's big things in our lives, and they can they can really threaten to become our identity. And so the practice of self-forgiveness is not allowing that to happen, to live in the truth of who you are, to acknowledge what happened, to acknowledge your part in it, to learn from it, and to repair it in any way you possibly can, and then to release it. All right. I hope that this is helpful. I recently had an experience where I needed to forgive myself, and that's where this is coming from. So just so no matter where you are on the journey, if you are just beginning to become self-aware and just learning about yourself, or you've been doing it for many years and practicing regularly, we are all still just on this path together, learning, growing, sharing, and trying to become the best versions of ourselves, the versions of ourselves that think and behave in alignment with who we really are, removing everything that's covering over the love and the beauty and the truth and the peace of who we actually are. And I think it's a never ending journey. So each time you find yourself needing to forgive yourself for something, come back to this process and use it over and over again and take the wisdom and move forward. All right, friends, I really hope that that was helpful. I'd love to hear from you. If there's anything that you are struggling to forgive yourself with right now, reach out, let me know, and maybe we can work through it together. Once again, I invite you to join my Substack. A link is in the show notes. Those embodiment practices that come out once a week are great for something like this, when you need an embodiment practice to help you be with your emotions, process them, and move you through. Those are great practices for that. So head to the show notes, sign up for that, and I hope you have a beautiful week. I love you very much. Namaste.